emerge.
Welcome to our trash revolution.
I'm so upset. Oh my God.
But God!
Welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and I've got a full jam-packed show ahead for all of you today. We're gonna talk about the energy markets and just how devastating things already are when it comes to the cost of a barrel of oil. So we'll discuss that in the first hour. In the second hour, our good friend and the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute, Trita Parsi, will be joining me to not only talk about the latest updates in the war against Iran. I actually want to talk to him about, AP wrote in his Substack about the civilian nuclear deal that President Donald Trump made with Saudi Arabia. There was a little bit of a backpedal today, and we'll get into a little bit on that. But I think that Trita Parsi brings up a point that is irrefutable, incredibly important to address. How are you going to engage in a war against the civilian nuclear program in Iran while simultaneously shaking hands with the Saudis for their civilian nuclear program? Anyway, we're gonna have fun. It's gonna be a great show. In our members only bonus episode today, I will discuss Jasmine Crockett weaponizing her race because she's a loser who can't accept the fact that she lost. And so now she's trying to sabotage a fellow Democrat's campaign for a Senate seat in Texas. What are you doing? You already lost. Anyway, I have strong feelings about that. And so we'll get to that in the bonus episode for our members, tyt.com/join to become one. Let's get to our first story.
This has to change. I am really sick and tired of the Israeli government, the Netanyahu government, taking American taxpayer dollars and then mistreating Americans.
Weeks ago, Senator Chris Van Hollen demanded that Israel release an American university student in the occupied West Bank who was abducted by IDF soldiers in the middle of the night, literally at 3 a.m. Now, tragically, she remains in Israeli custody without a single charge against her. No charges. As we know, there are literally thousands of Palestinians languishing in Israeli torture dungeons without a single charge. They are hostages. Now, in this case, we're talking about a literal American citizen, not the first one. I'm sure it won't be the last one who's been detained by the Israelis, held without charge, and very likely treated poorly. As we know, the treatment of detainees or anyone in Israel, not great. Nicholas Kristof's reporting of sexual abuse in these prisons is a good example of what I'm talking about. Now, Sama Safi is the young woman I'm referring to. She's a 20-year-old psychology student who was studying at Birzeit University in the occupied West Bank. She was abducted from her family home at 3 a.m. in the morning. Now, her mother grew up in the United States. Safi was born in the United States. She moved back to the West Bank for university. She apparently also grew up in the West Bank, but nonetheless, she's an American citizen who has been abducted without any charges against her. And we should care about this, right? This should be really, really important. This should be really important to the woman who helped to amplify rape allegations against Plattner, because she cares so much about American women being sexually harassed. She cares so much about, misogyny. Well, there's an American citizen languishing in an Israeli prison right now as we speak, no charges against her. She has been detained since June 2nd. And considering the fact that there are all sorts of sexual misconduct and rape allegations taking place right now against IDF soldiers in these prisons, I would just venture to say she should care. She should care just a little bit. But maybe she only cares when it comes to sinking campaigns. Anyway, let's move on. So 3 other students were also arrested around the same time, not American citizens, but they were also students of the same university, including a member of the Palestinian women's national soccer team. And according to The Guardian, they were all held at an Israeli detention and interrogation center in Jerusalem, notorious for its record of abuse. So I forget that woman's name, the woman who allegedly cares so much about American women being mistreated, Cheyenne Hunt. Hey, Cheyenne Hunt, maybe spare a word for the 20-year-old American citizen that was detained by IDF soldiers at 3 a.m. in the morning on June 2nd in occupied West Bank and is currently still in that prison without a single charge against her. Because you care about things like rape, right? There's a very good possibility that she's being mistreated in this prison that she doesn't belong in because she did nothing wrong. So what do we know about this case? What kind of excuses are we hearing from the Israelis in regard to her detention? Well, first, making matters worse for this poor 20-year-old Sama Safi is the fact that she has a chronic medical condition that requires regular treatment. This is something that Sarah on X shared with the public, and I want to give her a lot of credit. She drew attention to this story for me, and she has continued trying to draw attention to what is happening to Sama Safi. She suffers from a chronic and autoinflammatory disease that causes debilitating fevers and pain. She needs daily medication and regular treatment abroad in order to keep things under control. And her family said that she was receiving some medication in this Israeli prison, but not enough and not the right kind to properly treat her condition. Now, in late June, and this is important for you guys to know, in late June, Newsweek decided to shockingly publish a story about what happened to Sama Safi. And I say shockingly because the editor over at Newsweek is Josh Hammer, an uber Zionist who has absolutely no problem lying through his teeth on any panel that I've seen him on. With that in mind, Newsweek published this article, and I want to read you the headline: US citizen held by Israeli military for 3 weeks without charges. Without charges. So does the IDF have anything to say? Do the Israelis have anything to say? Have they given us a single excuse for why they would detain a 20-year-old university student, barge into her home and abduct her at 3 a.m. in the morning? Okay, well, I-24 News, which of course is an Israeli publication, says that the IDF arrested Sama Safi, 20 among others, at the university earlier this week, suspected of promoting terrorist activities and additional terrorism-related activities. That's it. That's all they need to do. Just claim that you were supporting terrorist activities without providing a shred of evidence and without even charging you with that. There are no charges against her. Makes me think that they're abundantly aware that she wasn't engaging in any terroristic activity or behavior. These people are so dangerous, so loathsome, and it is a stain on the reputation of the United States of America to be aligned with them. Now, Safi's attorney, who spoke to The Guardian, provided a little more detail about what the Israeli government is saying. So Safi's attorney, the Israeli human rights lawyer, Leah Samel, said that the students appeared to have been targeted after 2 other students who were themselves detained at the time, provided the Israeli military with dozens of names of people allegedly involved in an activist student organization called Katub. Now, Israel says that the group is affiliated with an organization known as the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which it has designated as a terror organization. So they're claiming that Sama Safi was part of an organization that is not designated as a terrorist organization, but is somehow related to or affiliated with a terrorist organization. So Safi, by the way, totally denies that she was part of any student group. And in regard to the students who provided names to Safi's lawyer, provided names to the IDF, Safi's lawyer makes a really good point. She says, I don't know how this information was extorted from them, probably by force. It's nonsense. So just think about how the IDF operates. They just randomly detain people and then under duress demand that they provide names of additional individuals that they can terrorize. Because here's the thing, if she was actually guilty of something, why not charge her? Like if there's probable cause, reason to believe that she's engaging in terrorism, why not charge her? She's not charged. Yet she has been sitting in an Israeli prison since June 2nd. 20-year-old, 20. So where is she being held right now? Well, the IMEU Policy Project provided an update today. Palestinian American student Sama Safi is now being wrongfully detained in Damon Israeli military prison and has been enduring horrific conditions and abuse after a temporary release for medical treatment. The Israeli military had no right to take Sama in the first place, let alone hold her in such inhumane conditions. It is vital that you call your senators and tell them to demand her unconditional and immediate freedom. Now, Senator Chris Van Hollen, as you saw in the video earlier, has been one of few lawmakers who gave a damn and has even said anything about this. Other senators include Peter Welch, Jeff Merkley, Chris Van Hollen, and in the House, only one lawmaker has raised awareness about what's happening to Sama Safi. One, and that's Ayanna Pressley. So I'll be kind to Cheyenne Hunt, the executive director of Reckoning Action, and just assume that maybe she's unaware that a young American woman is currently sitting in an Israeli prison with no charges against her. It's been the case since June 2nd. These prisons are notorious for raping detainees. And since she cares so much about rape, at least she purports to care so much about it, hopefully this message will get to her and hopefully she will raise some awareness about it. But something tells me she won't. I hope she proves me wrong. Where's Me Too? Where's Me Too? I guess sexual harassment at work is something worthy of destroying entire lives over. Okay, fine, fair enough. But what happens when you're dealing with a 20-year-old woman who's a political prisoner, essentially, and who could be sexually abused in these prisons because that's what these prisons are known for? Pathetic. I mean, think about the number of Democrats we have in both the House and the Senate. Literally one Democrat in the House, Ayanna Pressley, even bothered to say something about this. You know who else is in the House? You know who else is in the House. The rage is overwhelming. Anyway, let's get to our next story.
We also, by the way, do need to fill back in our arsenal. I will never understand, never, why, under any administration, a defense authorization meant to restock our military is denied. It makes no sense to me. Right now, Democrats are trying to hold off on restocking the American military. That's insane. That's crazy. I don't care what you believe about the war in Iran. Leaving our troops without the weaponry that they need for any potential conflict is nut job stuff. It's nutty. This is a point that Pete Hegseth made yesterday. He called the $1.5 trillion budget for the military a generational investment. Yeah, we need to do those things. These are things we need to do.
You know, we could just stop the war. That way our service members are no longer in danger fighting a war on behalf of the country that Ben Shapiro seems to care so much more about. And of course, that's the country of Israel. And it's just not lost on me at all that the person you just heard from fancies himself a fiscal conservative who basically puts out this video. The entire thesis is Congress must approve the $1.15 trillion National Defense Authorization Act funding bill. They must. Yeah, we're $40 trillion in debt. It's true that the Pentagon has failed every single audit. It's true that, even though Congress had approved close to $1 trillion for the Pentagon in the last National Defense Authorization Act, this war that we're fighting on behalf of Israel against Iran has already proven to be so expensive that Congress just passed a supplemental funding bill of close to $100 billion for Iran war funding. Ben loves it. He can't get enough. But here, do me a favor, Ben. Stop calling yourself a fiscal conservative. You're a fraud. That's what you are. You're an embarrassing fraud. Now, of course, Ben Shapiro demanding that Congress pass this bill doesn't have anything to do with the fact that there's a provision in there that merges the terrorist IDF with our own military, right? No, that can't be the case. So let's clear some things up about the National Defense Authorization Act, which does in fact include Section 219, which would merge our militaries. On Tuesday, the House passed a procedural rule vote, and that passed 214 to 211, with Representative Thomas Massey being the only Republican to vote no. Now, what was that procedural rule vote? The lower chamber voted 214 to 211 to pass the rule, advancing the National Defense Authorization Act, a stock trading ban bill, a budget framework for a third reconciliation package, and a stopgap measure that would fund federal agencies at existing levels until December 4th. So the rule also includes language to merge the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility. Is that really the name? That's really the name of the, okay. The Safeguard American Voter Eligibility America Act and the NDAA before it is sent to the Senate in a legislative procedure known as merving, which I honestly had never heard before, but okay, they're merving away. So there were some GOP holdouts. So that included Representatives Lauren Boebert, Anna Paulina Luna, and also Tim Burchett. And those individuals essentially represented enough holdouts to sink the rule vote. But they changed their minds after House Speaker Mike Johnson and then Steve Scalise and Tom Emmer bullied them, pressured them. So they ended up voting in favor of the procedural rule. So this is important because as you saw, there are a ton of other bills kind of crammed into this vote, and that was very much intentional. This is what we talk about when we talk about the poison pill. So former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene explains in detail. Take a look.
Let me explain the difference between the rule vote and the final passage vote. Now, any bill that goes to the House floor for a final passage vote has to go through a rule vote. And sometimes it'll be in a rule vote by itself. And sometimes they pack in other bills along with that bill and have just one rule vote for a whole package of bills. And that's a trick that they use to get Republicans to vote yes, because they may have a certain bill they really want to pass, even though they're against another one. They'll vote yes to that rule to move it forward. And then a bill will get voted on in final passage. That's a second vote, totally separate. The final passage vote can be a standalone bill, or it can be a package of bills. That's another thing they do to trick members of Congress to vote for something that another bill they really want to pass. Even if they're against another one, it'll trick them to vote yes when they really want to vote no.
Yeah, these are the dirty games they play. It's sick. The one area where I have strong agreement with some on the right, I remember Matt Gaetz was one of the Republican Congress people who would promote this idea. Standalone bills, please. There should be a law passed, which would be impossible because Congress would need to pass it. But there should be a rule that bills need to be voted on individually. Now, during the final passage vote, the bills were separated, and the NDAA, as we reported yesterday, passed 216 to 212. However, this time there were 7 Republicans who voted against it, which is so strange, guys. It's so strange. 6 of them actually voted yes on the rule vote, but 7 Republicans, they voted against. They voted yes on the rule vote, meaning they didn't even want any debate on the topic of Section 219. And then they proceeded to vote against the NDAA. How does that make any sense? Why would you vote against it, especially if you voted in favor of squashing any debate over Section 219? Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene has a few words for these particular Republicans. Take a look.
The total 7 that voted no today was Josh Burkeen, Tim Burchett, Eli Crane, give me one second, Harriet Hageman, Anna Paulina Luna, Thomas Massey, Chip Roy. I really appreciate those 7 Republicans that voted no to final passage. However, I wish 6 of them had voted no with Thomas Massey, because Thomas Massey had the courage to vote no on the rule. If those 6 Republicans have voted no on the rule, then I don't think the NDAA would have moved forward, and there would have been a much bigger fight on Section 219.
So this is another trick and another game that gets played. So oftentimes what will happen is, you think that House Speaker Mike Johnson doesn't know how each member is going to vote. He knows how each member is going to vote. And that's important because that allows for the rotating villain, rotating bad cop strategy that takes place in Congress with both parties. So you can go ahead and vote, against the rules. You vote against the idea of allowing for a debate on Section 219 on the House floor. And you could also vote against the NDAA, even though you're actually secretly in favor of it, because it's going to pass anyway. And voting against it might save you some of the backlash and the ire that might be directed toward you by your own constituents. That's how they play this game. So, as I shared with you all yesterday, when the House passed the NDAA, the fight isn't over yet because it needs to pass in the Senate. Now, last week, Democrats in the upper chamber in the Senate blocked the Senate version of this measure. Marjorie Taylor Greene is also calling on the Vice President, JD Vance, of course, to intervene when this bill makes its way to the Senate. Unfortunately, I don't trust JD Vance, and I do not believe that JD Vance is an anti-interventionist or someone who's genuinely critical of Israel. I don't believe it for a second. I don't put any faith behind him. I do have faith in the American people, though. On this issue in particular, I especially have faith in Americans on the left and the right because there is a lot of backlash. So pressure the hell out of your senators and do not let up. Call them incessantly, show up to their offices, do whatever it takes to make your voice heard, and let it be known that if they pass this treasonous provision in the National Defense Authorization Act, there will be political consequences. Their political careers will be over. All right, I actually want to take a break. When we come back, I'll reset this because I think it's important to talk about what this provision actually means, because I am positive that you've been hearing from various media figures, pundits, and yes, politicians who allege, no, this does not merge our militaries. What are you talking about? That's totally fake. It's made up. Yeah, well, there was a fantastic article in military.com today, and it was the most in-depth reporting I've seen on the topic of Section 219. So I'm going to tell you what it actually does. We'll be right back.
Merge.
A very important point from Asimov Prophet, who says a government can classify any organization as a terrorist organization. I'm surprised Trump hasn't classified windmill builders as a terrorist organization. Honestly, just don't jinx it, because I have no doubt that he would actually consider it. I mean, think about what Sebastian Gorka is currently doing, labeling American citizens as domestic terrorists, calling people like Amy Goodman a threat to national security. Come on. So yeah, I agree. I think that the labeling of terrorist or terrorist organization it's a weaponized word, a politicized, weaponized word to go after political enemies. Certainly that's the case with Sebastian Gorka. All right, the oh right is oh wrong. If Palestine opened up its own chapter of the Salvation Army, the Israeli government would designate it as a terrorist organization. 100%. 100%. Dude, they called UNRWA, a UN group that provides humanitarian relief to the Palestinians. They labeled them Hamas terrorists. They think everyone's a terrorist, by the way. They think I'm a terrorist. If you're not on your knees pleasuring the Israelis, they will call you a terrorist. Anyway, let's go to our gifted memberships. Actually, welcome to our new members, Cheesy Finger 79, and thank you for sending 5 TYT memberships. Let's get back to the show. What's up, everyone? Welcome back. I want to read one comment so you guys can get a little preview of what the members are going to hear in our bonus episode today. Elroy Independent says, it'll be interesting to see if Anna's anti-Black bias will be on display later in the broadcast. Now, this is, of course, the story about Jasmine Crockett attempting to sabotage James Talarico's campaign after he won the Democratic primary race for a Senate seat in Texas against her. She lost. And rather than be a good sport about it, rather than working hard to ensure that he wins over Ken Paxton, she's decided to essentially smear him, his supporters, people who vote in the district as racists, or not the district, the state, because it's the Senate race. I'm going to talk about it in greater detail, but to say that I have an anti-Black bias because I'm honestly, it's not just about the Black population, it's also about what I'm seeing with Israel. I am sick of people weaponizing their identity in a cynical manner for political gain, for career gain, for any gain. In the case of Israel, for literal billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, and American service members who lose their lives to fight a war on their behalf. Because if you don't, you're an anti-Semite, right? I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of it. So I'm going to tell the truth and I'm going to say what I actually think. And if you think that amounts to an anti-Black bias, I think you've got an issue. Jasmine Crockett ran a crappy campaign. She was a crappy politician and she was deeply corrupt. She sucked at making a case to the constituents that she was trying to appeal to. And rather than do a little bit of self-reflection, she's trying to sabotage a Senate race. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what I have to say. You got a little taste of it right now. Let's move on to the rest of Section 219. So we've talked about Section 219 a lot on the show. Of course, that is the provision in the National Defense Authorization Act that merges the Israeli military with our own. Now, in recent weeks, we've been hearing over and over again from Israel supporters, politicians, media figures, and pundits alike that no, that's not what this does. This does not integrate the IDF into our own military. That's crazy. I'll give you one example. Democratic Representative Adam Smith, here he is, downplaying what Section 219 is.
Section 224 has been of a lot of interest to our audience. This is what would effectively partially merge the US military with the Israeli military. You were originally in support of it. You changed your position on it. I just wanted to know about your thought process here.
Merge the US military with the Israeli military. What it does is it talks about co-development programs. And mostly I see this as a benefit to the US military, particularly when you're talking about missile defense. The Israeli military is really good at it. They can help us develop those systems so that we have a better system. I think it's an incredible exaggeration to say that this would merge the US military, because out of thousands, literally thousands of programs, we would have 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 that we were co-developing with the IDF.
But you've changed your position now, correct?
Okay, so before I get to the facts on the matter, what's up with his vocal fry? That's a real vocal fry. It's not a Jillian Michaels fake vocal fry. And I love it. I think it's hilarious. Anyway, but let's move on to the substance now. So military.com did a pretty fantastic in-depth report on Section 219. You heard there, Crystal Ball referred to it as Section 224. That was the original title. It later changed to 219, but we're talking about the exact same thing. So I'm gonna read you the excerpts that matter here. Haley Fuller, and thank you to Haley because this is an excellent report, wrote the following. Section 219 would direct the defense secretary to designate a Pentagon executive agent to oversee the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. That official would coordinate bilateral defense research, development, testing, evaluation, and industrial cooperation. That sounds like a lot. That sounds like everything in the military. No, does it not? Does it not? Let me read it again. Graphic 3. It would direct the defense secretary to designate a Pentagon executive agent to oversee the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. That official would coordinate bilateral defense research, development, testing, evaluation, and industrial cooperation. But there's more. There's more. The proposal originated as a bipartisan, bicameral United States-Israel Futures Act. Let me just emphasize the word bipartisan once more. We live under a uniparty because on the issues that matter the most, on the issues that literally get our own people killed, widespread agreement on the left and the right, isn't there? I mean, there isn't really a left in this country. Let's keep it 100. So let's name some names because there was a name here that I was unaware of until military.com put out this great report. So again, it bears repeating. Thank you to Haley Fuller for this incredible reporting. The proposal originated as a bipartisan, bicameral United States-Israel Futures Act introduced in the House by Representatives Ronnie Jackson, a Republican from Texas, and Don Davis, a Democrat in North Carolina. With companion legislation from Senators Ted Budd, a Republican, and of course, Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat from New York. And if you're curious, per the AIPAC tracker, Ronnie Jackson has received over $90,000 from pro-Israel PACs. Don Davis has received, oh my God, you are gonna believe this, over $4 million from the Israel lobby. Ted Budd has received $80,000 and Kirsten Gillibrand, $629,000. Jackson framed the proposal as a way to preserve America's technological advantage and deliver new battlefield capabilities to service members. What a crock of crap. Davis emphasized its potential to prepare troops for evolving threats, particularly unmanned systems and electronic warfare. Let's pause for a second. Unmanned systems. Yeah, let's have a little convo with the IDF in South Lebanon. How are they handling those unmanned drones that are getting them killed? We need their advice? Right, okay. Senators Budd and Gillibrand have similarly presented the initiative as an expansion of existing work on missile defense. This is important, guys, because remember that list I read to you that shows you just how integrated our militaries would be? That list grows bigger. So it work on missile defense, drones, and underground threats as a means to strengthen American military and technological capabilities. Do you see the humiliation ritual as clearly as I do? Because in order to sell this to the American people, you have American politicians on the left and the right repeating, regurgitating BS about how we need the Israelis so bad. Our military, they're just so incompetent. What would we do without the Israelis? They're so much more advanced than we are. Oh, if they're so advanced, then why aren't they giving us military aid? If they're so advanced, if they're rock solid, why are they desperately trying to integrate into our military to skirt any backlash from the American people in regard to the MOU that shells out over $4 billion a year in military aid to Israel. I mean, if their military is so much more advanced, why aren't they fighting Iran? So the lawmakers that I listed are not the architects of this plan. If you're wondering who the architect of this plan is, you're about to find out. A June 1st letter from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also appeared to claim credit for the broader policy, describing a shift from US aid toward joint defense cooperation, development, production, and investment as my plan. Netanyahu referred to it as his plan. So all the little boys and girls that he controls in our Congress who insist on throwing the American people under the bus, humiliating us in our military by claiming that we're just not as sophisticated and as advanced as the Israelis are. They're taking their orders from this guy, a literal war criminal. There's more. Because that list I read you of all the different ways in which the IDF would be baked into our military, it's even longer than what I expressed. The initiative would, it's amazing. The initiative would cover counter-drone systems, missile and air defense, artificial intelligence, quantum technology, autonomous systems, directed energy weapons, advanced sensors, cybersecurity, electronic warfare, biotechnology, and medical defense. It also contemplates joint testing, production, procurement, supply chain coordination, network connections, and the incorporation of Israeli or jointly developed technology into US military programs. I'd like to cue up the Adam Smith video again so we can remember what he did when he decided to lie to the American people by downplaying the seriousness of this. Because honestly, what's left? What other way could the Israelis possibly force themselves into our military? What portion of the military are they not attempting to infiltrate here? I'd like Adam Smith to answer that question, but it's not about merging, is it? Is it not? I don't know. Take a look.
Section 224 has been of a lot of interest to our audience. This is what would effectively partially merge the US military with the Israeli military. You were originally in support of it. You changed your position on it. I just wanted to know about your thought process here.
Merge the US military with the Israeli military. What it does is it talks about co-development programs. And mostly I see this as a benefit to the US military, particularly when you're talking about missile defense. The Israeli military is really good at it. They can help us develop those systems so that we have a better system. I think it's an incredible exaggeration to say that this would merge the US military, because out of thousands, literally thousands of programs, we would have 3, 4, maybe 5 or 6 that we were co-developing with the IDF.
But you've changed your position now, correct?
We have developed, provided, and continuously funded the Iron Dome system in Israel. Israel did not develop it themselves, and they certainly are not paying for it themselves. Adam Smith is a liar. He's obviously lying about the severity and invasiveness of Section 219. He is lying about our own military capabilities and the IDF's military capabilities. And the worst part about all of this, or more importantly, the best way to think of how invasive this is the way that this whole situation was framed by Colonel Douglas Macgregor on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive today. Macgregor said what this would do, what Section 219 would do, and he's a colonel, so he would know. It would codify and legalize what Jonathan Pollard did in being a traitor to the United States and selling American secrets to the Israelis. He served 20 years in prison for that. And what did the Israelis do afterward? They sold those secrets to the Soviets, which I don't know if you guys can recall, we weren't really friendly with at the time. Whatever you might think of the Soviet Union, they were enemies to the United States. And so why are we aligned with a country that keeps spying on us, stealing our nuclear secrets, things like that? Makes no sense. And now with Section 219, all of the potential Jonathan Pollards scurrying about in the CIA or wherever in our government will be free. In fact, they will be urged to share those secrets with the Israelis. Congratulations, America. By the way, for the right price, I'm sure Israel will go ahead and sell those secrets to anyone, including our biggest enemies. Why not? It's not like they haven't done it before. When we come back, we'll talk about how Trump is expanding the war and even considering boots on the ground, because of course it was predictable.
Merge.
All right, Ronald Fan writes in and says, hey, TYT family, and to you, Anna, violence, language, misbehaving isn't the answer. Improve our struggles is the answer if we want to defeat Trump and end the Iran war the correct way. I obviously condemn violence. I do not want to engage in violence. I don't want anyone else to engage in violence. I don't think that's going to be helpful. In fact, it is incredibly counterproductive to whatever you might be trying to accomplish. I get touchy on, criticisms or demands to rein in rhetoric. Yeah, because a lot of that is also subjective. And I don't know, what are we supposed to do when we have a government that doesn't represent us and insists on taking our money to fund atrocities and war crimes in a foreign country? All right, let's go to Jurassic Rabbit 92, who says she's definitely not being a good sport about. Oh, this is about Jasmine Crockett. She's definitely not being a good sport about it. I'm Black and I'm not pulling that dumb race card. Yeah, it's cynical. It's so obvious it's cynical. And anyone who doesn't see it blows my mind. The people who are playing into it probably just support Jasmine Crockett over Talarico. I don't care either way, by the way. Talarico won and he's up against Ken Paxton. So I would prefer for his campaign to not be sabotaged by Jasmine Crockett because she can't accept the fact that she lost. Anyway, all right, we've got 10 seconds. Ford Country 420 says, do we still have fans of that effing Fody Crockett around here? I don't know. Paying too much for your cell service and your kids are spending too much time on screens, and Noble Mobile wants to help. If you want to learn how, just go to tyt.com/switch. That's tyt.com/switch. They give you cash back for data you don't use. They help you track whether your kids are spending too much, or whether you're spending too much time on screens. So check it out, tyt.com/switch. Okay, Trump is egging on a wider war, and I want to provide you the receipts and make my argument here. So let's get into it.
Our military is capable if we end the start and stop approach of stopping to negotiate and then starting up a military campaign. We need to allow our military to do what they do best and then negotiate from the rubble.
Well, it's increasingly looking like Republican Congressman Michael McCaul is going to get what he wants, essentially pulverizing Iran and then negotiating from the rubble, because the Pentagon is apparently moving additional military assets and they're conducting a troop surge in the Middle East to, I guess, escalate the war against Iran. And troops on the ground, boots on the ground, not out of the question. We have no idea what Trump is thinking or what he's ultimately going to decide to do. Where is he going to land on this? But it is very expensive to send all these military assets to the Middle East and just keep them there for no reason. So I would venture to say that he is looking to escalate. So according to US officials who spoke to the Wall Street Journal, squadrons of jet fighters have been staged across the Middle East, and bomber aircraft at bases in the US and UK are on high alert to ramp up operations. So what has been transpiring over the past week? If you've been paying attention to the movement of military assets, then you're probably on top of this already. And it does signal that this war is about to escalate. So in the past week, special operations forces have deployed to the region from their US bases, and that's according to flight tracking data and the US officials who spoke to the Wall Street Journal. Squadrons of jet fighters have been staged across the Middle East, and bomber aircraft at bases in the US and UK are on high alert, again, to ramp up operations, according to one of the officials. Ramp up operations. There is an official tied to the White House who spoke to the Wall Street Journal and specifically said, we're gonna ramp up operations. But here's the problem. Ramping up operations doesn't accomplish anything because there really isn't a military option to end this war. If there were a military option, President Donald Trump would have already deployed that military option. And if you're under the impression that pulverizing Iran will bring the IRGC to its knees, I think you're sadly mistaken. All you have to do is witness a little bit of modern history and how the Iraq-Iran war of the 1980s played out. The Iranians do not give up, and they are willing to take a lot of pain to survive. And it turns out that they're actually very strategic in how they're carrying out this war. Also, I should note that the movement of military assets from various bases, US, UK, to the Middle East include F-16 jet fighters from an airbase in Germany. And then there's also F-35s that are being moved from an airbase in England to the Middle East. Also, and this is really important, more than 150 medics have arrived at the Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany in recent days. The hospital is the primary location for treating troops injured in combat in the Middle East as they fight a war on behalf of a foreign country, Israel. So they are anticipating more casualties, more US casualties in this disastrous war. So the preparations do indicate that Trump is considering escalation with possible boots on the ground as well. Although we don't really have much clarity or confirmation on it, I just want to give you all the details we have at the moment. And Abbas Araghchi, who's the Iranian foreign minister, did respond to some of Trump's threats. He said in a social media post that any aggression against Iran, including our infrastructure, which Trump repeatedly said that he's going to target, will compel a powerful and decisive response. The troop surge and military buildup could also be about fighting the Houthi rebels in Yemen, who have effectively blocked the Red Sea. So the transit of Saudi oil is essentially blocked. It's over for now. Saudi Arabia was getting around the Hormuz Strait blockade by using, a route that needs passage through the Red Sea, but the Houthis have now blocked it. So I think this is all obviously disastrous for the global economy. But what I'm prioritizing for the purposes of this discussion is literal human lives. Not only is this war already expensive, not only do we find ourselves in a quagmire, not only have we already lost 18 service members, Trump is sending 150 medics to the region in anticipation of more casualties on our side. So the Houthis, by the way, lashed out against Saudi Arabia last week. They accused Saudi Arabia of bombing an airstrip to prevent an Iranian plane from landing at one of their airports, the Sana'a airport. And the real question here is, if the surge in troops and military assets is about defeating the Houthis, well, is Trump going to be able to do that? And that's not a facetious question. I'm asking a genuine question because recent history proves that beating the Houthis was a lot more difficult than Trump expected, and he just quit. He just gave up at some point. So Trump launched an airstrike campaign against the Houthis last year. It ended after 2 months with a simple ceasefire. There was no deal, there was no bargaining, nothing. It's like, all right, we're done. These guys are serious and it's over. So after that, Houthis, they were battered by the US strikes against them, but they obviously survived, and then they are now able to carry out this blockade in the Red Sea. So I don't know if there's really a military option in defeating the Houthis. How do you defeat an idea? Especially an idea that springs from the atrocities that are being committed in the Middle East right now. That's what perpetuates the type of ideology that the West purports to be so concerned about. So the war has proven to be costly for the United States as well. So yesterday, the Republican-controlled House passed a bill. I thought it was $73 billion for supplemental military and intelligence funding, but no, it was close to $100 billion. I just want to remind you that Pete Hegseth and the Defense Department asked for a supplemental funding bill to the tune of, what was it, 67? Yeah, $67 billion. Congress like, we got you, bro. We're gonna give you close to 100 billion. Anyway, neocon Mark Thiessen, who by any rational description is a failure of a man. Okay, if you don't believe me, he was one of George W. Bush's speechwriters. He was the top speechwriter for Rumsfeld. And his political predictions, as you can imagine, have consistently been wrong. He was a huge promoter of the Iraq War, of course he was. And that reality of him constantly being wrong doesn't stop Fox News from booking him to give his expert opinion on what Trump should do next when it comes to the war against Iran. Take a look.
Devil's advocate, and some of these Democratic senators saying we don't know the plan to end. Like, how do we end this? And they're saying they haven't laid out or heard a specific strategy.
I can give it to you right now.
Go ahead.
It's very simple.
Which is why I asked.
Okay, so we stop the fighting in the ceasefire on the 20-yard line. We take it into the end zone. We do we have about 14 days of combat where we have to take out all the targets that we have available. We took out 85% of their defense industrial base. We take out 95% of it. We set back all their programs and we further entomb the nuclear dust. Then we stop major combat operations. We impose the blockade. We open up we open up the Strait of Hormuz, and then we go and we help the Iranian people overthrow their regime the same way that the United States, we have muscle memory doing this. We liberated 400 million people during the Cold War without boots on the ground. We armed the Contras, we armed the Mujahideen, we armed UNITA Angola, we helped Solidarity, we helped Charter 77 in Czech Republic. We know how to bring down regimes without boots on the ground.
Mark Thiessen is one of the most ghoulish, disgusting people in our media today. Did he just promote the fact that we armed the Contras? Do you guys remember how that happened? Do you remember the flood of crack cocaine in South LA by the CIA in order to raise the money to provide the arms for the Contras? Oh, but who cares? That's just a black community in Los Angeles that has struggled ever since, right? He's not a military expert. He's never served in the military. He has no idea what he's talking about. The only thing he knows without a shadow of a doubt is that he loves Israel and will expend any resource, any human life here in the United States on behalf of his little war, on behalf of his little country that he thinks is so important that it destroyed our country already. So why don't we actually hear from military experts, people who know what they're talking about? Because if there were a military option, Trump would have deployed it by now. We bombed the crap out of Iran for 40 days, and we came out of it with depleted munitions, And investigative reporting indicates that Iran still has upward of 70% of their munitions intact. Now, if you could snap your fingers and build a bunch of missiles in a day or so, maybe Mark Thiessen might have an argument, but that's not the case. It takes literally years to build these missiles and interceptors. Years. So Mark, what do we do? What do we do after we run out and we're engaged in a war with a country that has a ton of missiles? What do we do? Freaking moron. Anyway, I told myself I'd be calm. Anyway, so if Trump wants to put boots on the ground, if he wants to see a surge of troops, like the Iraq war surge that was carried out, would that be successful? Do we even have enough troops? I don't know. Why don't we actually hear from people who know what they're talking about? This is Colonel Douglas McGregor on the Daniel Davis deep dive from this morning.
What would happen if President Trump today was tempted to say, if an invasion happens, to say, I'm going to do my own Desert Storm and I'm going to move a bunch of troops over there? Can we do that?
No, first of all, we live in a new world today, and you could never build a lodgment unless you had enormous quantities of air and missile defense that you could surround the so-called lodgment area where you would collect and organize and assemble forces. And at the time, one of the things that we discussed privately was if we ever have to come back again in the future, given the direction of technology, we'd probably have to land at a place like Yanbu on the Red Sea and then cross the desert. Because if we tried to get into the Persian Gulf, we would be sunk or attacked or killed pretty rapidly. A lot of people realized, I think more people realized the danger that would be presented in the future than we appreciate right now.
I mean, is Mark Thiessen at all aware of the terrain in Iran, the geography and the challenges that Iran's geography poses to our soldiers? Does he care at all? No, of course not. Because there's really no cost to him in taking that risk, right? There's only upside for the Mark Thiessens of the world. He's not worried about losing his life. His kids aren't in the military. I don't even know if he has kids. He's not worried about lives lost. So let's try it. Let's try it and see what happens. What's the worst that could happen? We just spend a lot of money and get a bunch of soldiers killed? Is that what it is? We don't even have the amount of troops necessary to do a surge like that. Now, look, to be fair, Mark Thiessen's like, you don't necessarily have to put boots on the ground. Let's just bomb the crap out of Iran and bring them to their knees. That doesn't work. We've tried it. And the only way to maybe possibly succeed in regime change would be boots on the ground. But with Iran, it's actually a lot more challenging because they have a decentralized governing system, which is why the decapitation strikes that were carried out against Iran didn't work. It's not as simple as like, oh, let's just assassinate a bunch of their, top politicians, their political leaders, and we'll call it a day. They're mullahs. No, it's actually a lot more complicated than that. But Thiessen's a buffoon. One more video for you, because we aren't just limited in regard to the number of troops. We're limited in many ways. We are not prepared for this war that Trump stupidly trusted the Israelis in carrying out because they told him it'd be easy. Obviously, it's not easy. It's been a disaster so far. So here is Colonel Daniel Davis and Douglas McGregor talking about our limitations.
President Trump keeps saying, and Secretary Hicks said 2 days ago, repeated, we're the most powerful military on the planet. And yet we couldn't even do a Desert Storm 2 because of our limited capability. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, I think we have to understand that it's civilians in general, particularly people who are members of Congress, they're very impressed with glitz and glamour, shock and awe. You show them videotapes of explosions. They equate an explosion on the ground with an effect that is a war-winning effect. There's no understanding of how complex warfare is and the need for multiple capabilities being employed and orchestrated as an integrated force. There's just no understanding of that at all. So everybody is in the hunt for a silver bullet. Everybody wants to buy the silver bullet that will win the war. And we're finding out that there are no silver bullets unless you want to go the nuclear route. And we should talk about that because I think that's being discussed too.
I do think that's being discussed, and I'm worried about it. I'm worried that the country that has a clandestine nuclear program and consistently threatens to use those nukes happens to be the country that convinced Trump to engage in this war because Iran can't have nukes, which they didn't have, and there was no indication they were actually building. I actually kind of wish they did build nukes, because that would have served as a deterrent, and maybe Trump would have thought twice before attacking them and destroying the global economy with a quagmire war that we don't see an end for. How does this end? The only way this could end is if Trump takes his ball and goes home. I know that's a hard thing to hear. I know he doesn't like to think of himself as a loser. He's in government right now. He's the president of the United States right now. And he's still crying like a little bitch over 2020. We're in a lot of trouble. I don't know how this ends. And I'm terrified that nuclear bombs will be used. I'm terrified that more innocent people, including our service members, are going to get killed. And obviously, I'm worried about the devastating destruction that's happening to the world economy, our global economy. Because even if the war ended today, guys, things don't just go back to normal immediately. You don't just snap your fingers and, the shut down oil refineries start working again. No, like a lot goes into it, and a lot of damage has been done to oil and gas infrastructure in the Gulf and in Russia, which, it's a different war. But when we come back for the second hour, I will be joined by Trita Parsi to talk about the nuclear deal that Trump has made with the Saudis as he conducts a war against Iran over their nuclear program. Don't miss it. We'll be right back.
Merge.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
Rich and powerful men abusing, assaulting, and abandoning young women. These rich and powerful men donate to the politicians in Washington, D.C., play golf with the elites in Washington, D.C. They are foreign leaders who we don't want to offend. They interact with our intelligence agencies that we don't want to disobey. There is something rotten in Washington.
And are people still talking about this guy, this creep?
All those congressmen you just saw there are on the record as protecting the child rapists who were clients of Epstein. They have not prosecuted a single person outside of Epstein and Maxwell.
Yep.
Not one.
Is Trump engaging in this cover-up because he's in the Epstein files?
I don't understand why the Jeffrey Epstein case would be of interest to anybody. It's pretty boring stuff.
So as the government keeps telling us, yeah, there's other people. Yeah, they raped those girls. So what? We're gonna cover up for them. But why are you guys so mad?
A nation that chooses impunity for the rich and the powerful at the expense of our children is a nation that has lost its moral purpose. Are you on the side of the people? Are you on the side of America's children? Or are you on the side of the rich and powerful who've had their thumb on the scales and shafted Americans for decades?
The rest of the news media says you should not fight for positive change. If you do, you're not really a reporter or a journalist, because reporters and journalists don't care what happens. I don't agree. That's not written anywhere. That's not a law. It's just a rule that they invented so that reporters didn't actually challenge the people that are in power. Well, we don't agree with that. We think we should challenge the people in power, that actually makes you a better journalist, not a worse one.
Who do you guys use?
We have AT&T.
And how much do you pay per month?
$345, and that includes a company discount.
How many people?
5 phones.
$70 a line, right? I've started a wireless company called Noble Mobile that is trying to cut everyone's bills in half.
What would like a family of 4 cost?
The average Noble Mobile user is paying $42 a month, but also they're using their smartphone 17% less.
Okay, how does that work out?
We give you $20 back in cash every month based upon how much data you use or don't use. You know when you're doom scrolling or messing around on your phone, you're like, oh wait, I'm actually costing myself money right now. The goal with Noble Mobile is to encourage us to look up at our children's lovely faces, like touch grass, appreciate life. A friend of mine calls these things are rectangles of sadness. So we're trying to change that and improve everyone's relationships with their phones.
It's a very noble cause.
Well, thank you, sir. That's what it is. Been on YouTube for 20 years.
The original political partner on YouTube, the Young Turks.
The Young Turks.
The Young Turks.
Godfather of independent media.
Favorite news platform by far. Oh, it's not even close.
The Young Turks. It's the largest online news show in the world.
I watched you guys before I had a channel at all.
And I watched Cenk, so Cenk's really the start of it all.
Big shout out to Cenk from Young Turks.
Cenk Uygur, founder of TYT, a man who probably needs no introduction.
Cenk, so great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you, David.
Fan you worked for a long time, man.
Anna Kasparian is one of the most followed and influential progressive women online.
I love Anna.
Your presence has been essential for me to really grow.
Do all of you know the Young Turks? This is why what Young Turks are doing is so important.
I've watched you for many years. You are insightful. I thank you for that.
I was going to introduce myself, but it sounds like you guys might know us.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Anna Kasparian with you. Just going to read a quick super chat before we move on. This is from Ali Adib, who says, I like that Trita Parsi is returning to the show. He'll never go on the Free Press because they don't know how to treat a Parsi, which I really appreciated, and I think you're right. But with that in mind, and before we get to that interview, I wanted to kind of fill you in on some of the latest updates on the Saudi civilian nuclear program deal that Trump announced yesterday. Let's get into it. President Donald Trump announced that the United States has made a deal with Saudi Arabia in regard to their development of a civilian nuclear program. Now, what really stood out about this deal was the fact that it started, or at least the negotiations for it began under the Biden administration, and there was a pretty big caveat that the Biden administration insisted on. We're not going to let you pursue this program unless you normalize relations with Israel. Now, they didn't finish negotiating before Biden's term was up. Trump comes into office, he continues negotiating. And when he announced the deal, there was no mention of normalizing Saudi Arabia's relationship with Israel. So that caveat seemed to be totally removed. Well, now it looks like Trump got the call from the man who calls it the shots, the actual person who makes the decisions, and that's Benjamin Netanyahu. Because today, Trump did a complete 180, and it appears he did it unilaterally. So here's the headline from the Washington Post: Saudi nuclear deal in doubt as Trump adds new condition regarding Israel. A day after the agreement was signed, the president laid out a new requirement that the Saudis normalize relations with Israel. And then in the body of the piece, they write that the nuclear deal, which was fiercely opposed by Israel, which you can't have that, is totally subject to Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords, Trump said in a social media post. And then later, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt seemed to confirm that President Donald Trump made this decision unilaterally without even, talking to the Saudis and updating them on what he's demanding. Take a look.
Just to continue on the Saudi nuclear deal, do the Saudis agree with this interpretation since it wasn't part of the initial agreement? And has the president talked to MBS since this new condition was announced?
As you know, the president just put out this statement a few hours ago. I don't believe he's had a call with MBS in the hours since. However, this is something that he has raised in previous conversations and has also said many times in the past.
Now, before the 180 was carried out by President Trump, Trita Parsi, the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute, wrote about this civilian and nuclear deal with Saudi Arabia titled, "The US-Saudi Nuclear Deal Makes No Sense. How will Washington get Tehran to accept intrusive inspections beyond the JCPOA when Saudi is offered enrichment with no IAEA inspections?" So luckily, to discuss this story with us today is Trita Parsi, and we will discuss what the deal itself actually entails, and I'll get his comments on the latest update. Trita, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you again.
So before we even get to the 180 that Trump did this morning, I am very not curious because I read your piece, but I would like our audience to be familiar with the arguments that you're making in your piece, especially as it pertains to IAEA inspectors.
Yes, let me first say something that's very important to understand. This is not a new thing. The Biden administration pushed this very hard. And they were really building off of Trump's Abraham Accord. I mean, the only thing they seemed to care about in the Middle East was to get Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. And as part of that package, they were entertaining offering security guarantees to Saudi Arabia on the level of NATO, which means that the United States would be obligated to come and defend Saudi Arabia. And of course, then the Saudis wanted to have this nuclear component to it. And there were moments in which after October 7th, when everything on the Abraham Accord kind of went to a standstill, that the Biden administration was contemplating doing just a standalone nuclear deal with the Saudis that would not have required them to normalize relations with Israel because the Israelis were paying very little attention to normalization at the time. They did recognize, however, that this would be a rather strange deal because the United States would essentially be giving the Saudis nuclear enrichment capability while simultaneously trying to deprive the Iranians from having that same technology and sanctioning them for having that technology. And they also recognized that this deal could give the Saudis a pathway to a nuclear weapon. And as a result, they were looking into, and I write about it in the Substack, they were looking into various ways of dealing with that issue, such as actually having American troops guard this nuclear facility and protect it from Saudis so that the Saudis would not be able to take over that facility that was in Saudi Arabia. They were even looking into having self-destruction mechanisms at the site. So to make sure that if the Saudis were going in a direction that the US didn't want, it could be destroyed. It's kind of bizarre that if you think that those measures may be necessary, perhaps that would be a hint that this is not a deal you should be doing in the first place. But the Biden administration was so adamant about binding Saudi Arabia to the United States out of the fear that it would be drifting away towards China. And as a result, they were contemplating these things. Now, the Trump administration essentially picked up from where the Biden team left it off. They're offered this, and as part of this team, this deal, the inspections would be American inspections. It wouldn't be the international standard of the IAEA going into these nuclear sites. It wouldn't be the same safeguards, etc., which then creates another complication with if they simultaneously still desire to make some sort of a nuclear deal with the Iranians, because the JCPOA had very intrusive inspections. And if you want to resurrect that, or if you even want to go beyond that, which I'm sure the Trump administration would love to do so they can say they got a better deal than Obama, how can you do then simultaneously give the Saudis something completely different? The whole argument, and the Trump administration has tried to deprive the Iranians from enrichment. Now, I don't think that ever would have worked. But what happened in February before the war was that there were proposals on the table that the Iranians had agreed to, in which they would have agreed to a couple of years of a moratorium on enrichment. They would not be enriching at all, which was a very surprising development in my view, because the Iranians have been so adamant to never agree to any type of a pause. And in the run up to the MOU, there were discussions in which the Iranians were coming along with an even longer moratorium, up to 12 years. How are you going to demand the Iranians to not enrich uranium for 12 years while you're simultaneously giving the technology to the Saudis? So it seems like, this side of the administration has no idea what the other side of the administration is doing. And as a result, these haphazard, contradictory proposals and deals that are being struck. And the ultimate end of it, of course, is that nothing gets achieved.
Right. That's exactly right. Now, in the case of the Biden administration, let's rewind for a second, because you said something that caught my attention. I understand why Biden, who was the top recipient of money from the Israel lobby, would be desperate to normalize relations with Israel. But was he motivated to provide this program for the Saudis? And if so, why?
It's really interesting. You have on the one hand this motivation, which was to really do something that pleased the Israelis. And the Biden administration, at first when they were out of office, those officials were critical of the Abrams Accord. But then once they got into office, at first they were trying to find a way to do something that was similar, that wouldn't look as if they were building on it. They certainly didn't like the idea of having the same name because they didn't want to give Trump credit for it. But that was the only priority they had. And they sacrificed everything for that. It was partly driven by the idea that the administration that would be able to get the Saudis to drop all of their demands on the Palestinian issue and just cave to the Israelis would be a historic administration. It was also the requirement or the desire to make sure that in this new world that we were entering, that was increasingly becoming multipolar, certain key states, such as Saudi Arabia, because of its financial strength, because of its resources in terms of energy and oil, would be bound to the United States and really kept away from having some sort of a neutral role or playing both with the Chinese and with the United States. I mean, the Biden administration, their view of the movement towards multipolarity was much darker than what the current administration had. And as a result, again, they were willing to make massive sacrifices in order to be able to get the Saudis to agree to this. And they were willing to offer, frankly, insane concessions to the Saudis. And the other one that, of course, they were entertaining, and it seems like the Trump administration has at least avoided that one, is to offer the Saudis security guarantees that would go beyond anything the United States has done with them in the past, which would really obligate the United States to defend the Saudi kingdom and the royal family there. And there is a concern.
Pause.
Yeah.
Pause. Sorry to interrupt you, but this bears a little more elaboration. When you say security guarantees, are they the type of security guarantees that we provide to Israel, or are they like the type of security guarantees we provide to countries like Ukraine? I think there's a difference there.
There's a huge difference. And in some ways, actually, the Israeli ones are much more informal. There is not a formal treaty between the United States and Israel. There is a treaty between the United States and Turkey because Turkey is part of NATO. There isn't one between the US and Israel, but there is just this political commitment that at least existed up until recently. It seems to be, in some ways, at least public opinion is making it much more difficult to sustain. This would be something that would, at least what the Saudis demanded, would be on par with what the US has with NATO countries, which is the highest level that exists. It is essentially a defense pact. An attack on Saudi Arabia is going to be treated as an attack on the United States. And as much as the United States has had these informal commitments to Saudi Arabia, which it hasn't lived up to from the Saudi perspective, this would make it explicit and formal. And it would be a slap in the face of all of the promises that administrations such as the Biden administration and certainly the Trump administration has made, which is we need to get out of the Middle East. This is the opposite. This is truly binding ourselves, entangling ourselves by a treaty to the internal affairs of the Middle East and signing up to actually treat any attack on Saudi Arabia as an attack on the United States.
What would happen if Israel attacks Saudi Arabia? I mean,
that's interesting. Yeah. It's an interesting question because this is part of the problem. The United States gives too many security guarantees. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes in conflicts, it actually has a commitment, one, informal or formal, to both sides in that conflict, which is part of the reason I think a strong argument to really review this and recognize that we should not be committing ourselves in this matter. And the more we do, the less value it has because the credibility of these security guarantees becomes less when we are overextending ourselves.
Well, shockingly, Israel might actually be useful in this very specific scenario because I'm not entirely convinced that even if Saudi Arabia agreed to the Abraham Accords, that Israel would be okay with them having a civilian nuclear program. Yeah. And to be fair to the Israelis, which people think I'm never fair to them, but in this case I will be because Saudi Arabia has expressed some interest in obtaining a nuclear weapon as a deterrent. And I don't blame them for wanting that, given what we're seeing in the Middle East right now. If you have a nuclear weapon, you're far less likely to be attacked by the United States. And I think right now, with Israel as our ally, many countries in that region are worried about being attacked either now or eventually by the United States.
And here's where there is an argument, and it's actually backed up with facts. Once you give the country the type of nuclear technology that the US is now offering the Saudis, then they also have the leverage of saying, well, if you don't give us the security guarantees, then we will go nuclear and we will build a nuclear bomb, because now they have the capability of doing so. So even though there is no security guarantee as part of this deal, and perhaps the Trump administration really didn't want to give that to the Saudis, this may provide the Saudis with the leverage in which down the road they can issue such threats in order to get it. This is what South Korea, for instance, have been able to do. And now we have massive security guarantees to South Korea. In fact, we have by law, there's a US law that says that we can never have less than 25,000 troops in South Korea.
Wow. So let's fast forward to what was announced today, which is that Trump very clearly did an about face. And now he's saying that normalization with Israel is mandatory in order for this deal to get through. And this isn't related to the Saudi nuclear deal, but I think that it's telling of how the Israelis view their influence on us and on Donald Trump particularly. So Benjamin Netanyahu went on some Israeli television show and he said the following. After Trump gets elected, he says, I went in with 7 big slides. Quote, here's what we're going to do, he told Trump. Not, are you allowing us or don't you? I told him about Fordo and said your B2s would be much more effective. He listened, and in the end, he joined. So it's amazing because if you talk about the undue influence of Israel on our government, you get called an anti-Semite, but the Israelis brag about it, they boast about it on a regular basis. They rub it in our faces. So do you think that Trump, basically did the 180 because of the Israelis and their backlash, or could there be another reason?
I cannot see any other plausible reason as to why he would have changed this and said that it is contingent upon them joining the Abraham Accord. I mean, that was the only other conditions that the Israelis wanted. If it was because of a backlash against the deal itself, he would have walked out of the deal. He would have recognized that, it doesn't make sense giving that technology while you're trying to deprive others from having that technology. It doesn't make sense. I mean, it at a minimum, do it later. It complicates a potential deal with Iranians. So, if that was the case, he would have had a different reaction. It would have nothing to do with the Israelis joining the Abraham Accord. So the only plausible explanation is that there was a massive backlash from the Israeli side and from the pro-Israeli side, because the deal that was on the table, or that they were discussing before, the problem the Israelis had with it was not security guarantees to Saudi Arabia. They were fine with that. What they were having a major problem with was either if the language on the Palestinian state was too strong, and I can tell you what it was really weak, but mainly it was the nuclear component. They did not want to see that technology in the hands of the Saudis, and now suddenly have to worry that potentially the Saudis will also go nuclear. On the Palestinian state, they were toying with ideas, not, the strongest language was a pathway to a Palestinian state. We've been on a pathway to a Palestinian state for 7 decades. It means nothing. But they even weakened that to be a political horizon for the Palestinians. They didn't even mention a state. So it was at that level, but the real concern was the nuclear issue, and that this would be given to them as part of a normalization. But I don't think that's the key reason why the Israelis didn't go that direction. I think what they saw after October 7 is that they could just annex all of the Palestinian territory. The US would be fine with it. So why make a deal with the Saudis in order to be able to go down that path? You can already go down.
Oh, that's a devastating point.
That's
a great point. Oh, you're so right about that. Well, I think in the end, given how the Israelis feel about this deal, it's unlikely to actually come to fruition. And I think that's probably a good thing. I think that's probably
I wouldn't be so sure. I mean, they're going to make their opposition to it. I think in this case, I think it's very fascinating. There's a deal, he announced it, he brags about it, and next day he just fundamentally changes the terms of the deal on Twitter. What does it do? it sends a signal to everyone. Not only can you not trust Trump's promises, you cannot even trust his signature. Even if he negotiates a deal, it's a treaty, whatever it is, it's formalized. He can back away from it. Now, will he really back away from it? I think it's a struggle. It's a question mark at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if it would go forward in some ways because there's financial interest involved as well with investments by Saudi in the United States, buying Westinghouse reactors. But nevertheless, a complication has clearly been created here.
All right, well, fascinating stuff. Trita, as always, pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great night. We'll see you soon.
You too. Bye.
All right, everybody. We have to take a break. When we come back, we'll dive right into the energy crisis. I really appreciated a monologue that Tucker Carlson published on YouTube last night about the impending energy crisis. And we're going to kind of break that down and give you some pretty crushing numbers when we return. Don't miss it. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to our social break. Video Z3N in our member section. This is our YouTube member section specifically says Republicans are strategically delaying any declaration of Mitch McConnell's death or vacancy until after August 3rd, 2026 to avoid triggering a special election. I have no doubt that they're trying to delay. I am not going to issue any declarative statement about Mitch McConnell's whereabouts. I don't know if he put out that video with his wife and it seemed like he was still alive. I don't know where he's at now. He's not in Congress though. He's not serving in the role that he is supposed to serve in right now. And there's a very obvious reason why they're not doing anything about it in Congress. Anyway, they don't want Thomas Massie to run for that seat. That's what it is. Anyway, let's go to Liz Smith, who says, I usually watch a pirate feed on YouTube. I'm too old to figure out Twitch. Ha ha ha. I'm too old to figure out Twitch too. Do you know how many times I tried to do the like Amazon free subscription thing for our own channel? And I'm just like, I can't figure it out, whatever. Okay, let's go to Cyclonic Karma, who says pretty much convinced that only God can fix this mess and it will be masterful when he does, all in good time. It is shocking that I'm saying this, but I have my days when I think that too, to be honest. I said something along those lines on Piers Morgan's show yesterday when it came to justice in regard to Benjamin Netanyahu and his war crimes. We might not see justice in this world. It sucks. Okay, Matthew Starr, you are the best because he sends us a super chat and it simply says merge. Merge. Like, what is that? What is that? Why do you talk like that? You are a ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. Like, clean that up. Clean that up. Anyway, let's move on to some other news, beginning with this.
Iran and the countries around Iran produce about 20% of global oil supply. Russia, meanwhile, produces about 12% of global oil supply. So these are the biggest energy producing regions in the world, and the wars have gravely affected their ability to produce that energy and to ship it anywhere else and to refine it for that matter.
Overnight, the Houthis claimed they struck 2 Saudi tankers in the Red Sea. This image from NASA appearing to show at least 1 ship on fire. All of this pushing oil prices higher once again. Brent crude now topping $100 a barrel.
Oh yeah, you heard that right. Brent crude now topping $100 a barrel. And things are about to get a lot worse because based on the movement of US military assets and a surge of troops into the Middle East, it looks like Trump is looking to escalate the war against Iran, which, doesn't really bode well for the Houthi blockade in the Red Sea, doesn't bode well when it comes to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But he's going for it anyway. That's who Trump is. Just totally unhinged, total lunatic. Clearly doesn't care about the health and well-being of his own country and certainly not the global economy. So Tucker Carlson dedicated his latest monologue on this very matter. And I appreciate it so much because something that has driven me crazy, not just during this war, but for years now, is this whole notion of we need to drill more here in the United States to be energy independent. Now, whether or not you think it makes sense to drill more, put that aside. Because what I want to address is the topic of energy independence, which makes no sense when you have a globalized energy market, meaning oil and gas companies sell their product to the highest bidder on the global stage. Unless we nationalize, our oil and gas, you actually really can't do that. I don't know if you guys know this, but we are the top exporter of oil and gas, but we also import a ton of crude. And that's because our refineries here in the United States can only refine a certain type of oil that we can't drill for here in the United States. So we import it from other parts of the world. It is a global economy. There's no such thing as energy independent. We don't have nationalized oil and gas companies, okay? Now, I think we should have a discussion about potentially nationalizing one oil company. And the reason why I think we should do that is because we should have an entity that's hyper focused on keeping our strategic petroleum reserves full, But anyway, and that way, when we have a crisis like this, it can mitigate wild spikes in energy prices. But that would actually take strategy, planning. We don't have a government that has any interest in that. So getting back to Tucker Carlson, he addresses the already poor conditions we're dealing with when it comes to energy and how much it's gone up in recent weeks and months. And the fact that these wars continue, not just in Iran, but also the Ukraine-Russia war, where Ukraine is hitting some of Russia's oil infrastructure, their refineries and stuff like that. That is causing a really big problem when it comes to the supply of energy on the international stage. Take a look.
This war, combined with the war that we're waging against Russia in Eastern Europe, have completely shut down probably a quarter of the world's energy. And what does that mean? Well, it means poverty and disaster, and almost certainly famine in some places in Africa, because of course, half of all global fertilizer is derived from natural gas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It means a readjustment downward of the standard of living of people, certainly in Europe, almost certainly in the United States, and definitely in parts of Asia.
And the mention of fertilizer doesn't get mentioned enough, because aside from an energy crisis, what we are playing with here is a food shortage, a global food shortage, because a third of the world's fertilizer also transited through the Strait of Hormuz. And so right now, farmers are having a hard time getting their hands on fertilizer, or it's incredibly expensive because there's limited supply on the market. So, and let me also just quickly note, there are countries that have already been rationing gas, rationing oil, because of the fact that they've been hit even harder than we have due to this war against Iran, due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. So with all of that in mind, I want to go to my favorite part of his monologue, where he took jabs at the disinformation coming out of the likes of our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Take a look at that.
Take a look at the Secretary of Defense. This is in June. on a network Sunday show is asked about energy and the effect of this war on energy. And here's how the Secretary, I beg your pardon, of War responds to the question. Watch.
We have a totally different energy dynamic around the world. By the way energy flows today, the straits will be nowhere near as relevant 1 to 2 years from now. Because of the foresight of President Trump, he's made us energy independent at home. We're a net exporter. Now Venezuela, through our partnerships. Now we're killing foreign terrorist leaders who have terrorized the American people. The amount of drugs and gangs that came from
energy
United States of America.
Prices are pretty high right now.
It's a huge deal.
So I don't know that the independence is helping people at the pump.
They are.
There was a very specific point in there, and it was, look, the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. Like, that's measurable. Everybody knows that. It's been closed since April. You kind of can't lie about that. But it doesn't really matter because the Strait of Hormuz is basically becoming irrelevant. Like, really, who cares about the Strait of Hormuz? It's just 20% of global energy. No one really cares because the energy dynamic is changing. Because we arrested Maduro and his wife and put them in a cell in New York. And so the energy dynamic is changing. So of course, in real life, it doesn't mean anything because it was spoken by someone who doesn't know anything.
I mean, look, that was a mild criticism, but I'll take it. I'll take it. Pete Hegseth might be the dumbest political figure in the country, maybe even dumber than Trump. And that's just because he's better at articulating his dumb statements doesn't mean that he's smarter. He's so dumb. And I think the thing about Hegseth that's so infuriating is he's both dumb and a liar. And a liar. And that was on full display at the Senate Appropriations hearing this week. Okay, well, putting that aside, that was a statement from Tucker, right? He doesn't know anything. Okay, so what does he need to know? And this is the most important part. What does energy independence actually mean? And is that even possible in our context? Well, he addresses that in the next video.
So pre-war, which is to say on February 27th of this year, about 20 million barrels of oil, not even including LNG, but let's just stick to petroleum, oil. About 20 million barrels per day were moving through the Strait of Hormuz. So that's a huge amount of energy to make up for. How are you going to do that? Well, of course, with Venezuela, which we know from listening to the president has the largest oil reserves in the world. But does it matter? Well, it doesn't matter if the oil's still under the ground. So how much oil is Venezuela exporting now? Well, the good news is the number is up. What's the number? Well, it's a little over 1 million barrels a day. 1 million barrels a day. Now, keep in mind, the Strait of Hormuz allowed 20 million barrels a day to go through before the Trump administration decided to kill the elderly religious leader of Iran. Where do we get the extra 19 million barrels per day to make up for what we've lost in the Strait of Hormuz, which apparently no longer really matters? No hint, because there's no answer.
And he's right about that. No hint, because there's no answer. And this is something that I've been digging into pretty deeply in my research because I want to know if there is an answer. I want to know if there is some other transit route that can be utilized in order to get the flow of oil and LNG back to where it was. 20 million barrels a day through the Strait of Hormuz is no joke. So how are we going to make up for that? So right now, there is an effort to bypass the Strait of Hormuz with new pipelines that are currently being constructed. Remember that the Houthis also block the Red Sea. So, some of the solutions required passage through the Red Sea. So it doesn't look like that's going to happen unless somehow the US defeats the Houthis, which you would think would be easy to do, right? Except we didn't defeat the Houthis in the Saudi-led war against them, which of course we joined. We caused a freaking famine in Yemen in an effort to defeat the Houthis, and we failed. So that blockade, I think, is gonna remain. So how do we make up for the 20 million barrels of oil a day that are no longer transiting through the Strait of Hormuz? So like I said, there are some pipeline projects in the works. Some of them have been sped up in order to, respond to this crisis we're dealing with. The state-owned oil company of Abu Dhabi is accelerating construction of a $3 billion 200-mile pipeline to Fujairah. That pipeline, which will run parallel to an existing one, aims to increase oil supplied to Fujairah by more than 1.2 million barrels a day. Wait, 1.2 million. Okay, all right, so we got to make up for 20 million barrels of oil that were transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. This is just one project, to be fair. 1.2 million barrels a day, great. The pipeline will be completed soon, by mid-2027. Disaster. There are other projects in the works as well, though, so don't worry. They're just taking too long and will also be insufficient. So the new projects to bypass Hormuz could carry an added 3.8 million barrels of oil a day by the end of next year and 7.3 million barrels per day by the end of 2028. And that's according to analysts over at Goldman Sachs. There is no answer because there is no solution here. There's certainly no solution that would be fast enough and sufficient enough to prevent a global meltdown. Actually, there is one solution: end the war. End the war, please. But that's not going to happen because, as I've repeatedly said on the show today, Trump is moving additional, military assets and troops to the Middle East to escalate the war. We're in a lot of trouble, and it is terrifying to be led by a government full to the brim of people who don't even understand how things work. Pete Hegseth has no idea. Weekend host at Fox News. He had no qualifications to be the Secretary of Defense, yet here we are. We should keep in mind also that when Trump visited President Xi, I believe this was back in May, he was very friendly. And I knew that there was something up. His friendliness was for a strategic purpose. And soon after that, President Xi stopped importing oil into China and instead tapped into China's strategic petroleum reserve, which of course would free up supply of oil in the international market. But the question that remains is like, what did President Xi get in return? Did he get promises from Trump that the United States won't intervene if China tries to take over Taiwan? Is there something else at play? And by the way, China can't forever avoid importing oil. So in recent days, they ramped up imports again. And then the one other thing that's disastrous that no one's thinking about, no one's talking about, our entire economy right now is based on a bet on AI. Okay, so explain to me what AI development requires. Data centers, right? What do those data centers need? Now, I don't think we should ensure that our entire economy hinges on the development of AI. I think that's a big mistake. But that's an even bigger mistake when you consider the direction we are headed in when it comes to an energy crisis. We got to take a break. When we come back, I really want to talk about just the dirty deeds being carried out by establishment Democrats against candidates like Abdul El-Sayed. We'll be right back.
Tucker Carlson, a terrible friend.
Fox in our members section makes a pretty devastating and accurate point. Remember, the Saudis chop up reporters. Mohammed bin Salman ordered the killing and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a US resident and a reporter or columnist for the Washington Post. Anyway, let's go to Marco Antonio P, who says Blue MAGA is here, apparently defending Jasmine Crockett. Look, I don't even know if that viewer is a defender of Jasmine Crockett, but what I do know is that once identity politics gets cynically, especially injected into a political fight, people they just want to believe that the cause is racism or anti-Semitism or whatever the hell they want to believe. Don't be fooled. By the way, racism is real. But what's also real is people weaponizing identity cynically to either destroy someone's political campaign or to move up, the ladder at work, whatever it is. And I've seen so much of it, and I was such a coward in not speaking out against it. And I'm not going to be a coward anymore. And I don't care which identity group is engaging in that behavior. I'm going to call it out. But that's not to say that there are no instances of racism. Racism does exist, but when it isn't in the case, I'm going to call it out. All right, welcome back to the show, everyone, and welcome to our Twitch community. Just want to read a quick comment from our Twitch viewers, including AJ Nestor, who says, declaring a group, real or imagined, a terrorist organization is becoming quite the pastime for the bad guys. It's been the pastime for the bad guys following 9/11. It's like their favorite tactic. So you're right about that. And welcome to Matthew Star BB. I hope you enjoy our members only bonus episode today. And for those of you who are considering membership, look into it, see if you can, if you're interested in it. And thank you to everyone who supports the show and keeps us independent from, corporate influence. As you can tell, we do have partners time to time, but we're very picky with who we choose to partner with. And I think Noble Mobile is great. I have no problem promoting them. There was one company that we were involved with that I didn't fully understand was a disaster, but I also avoided promoting them. And I'm glad I did. Anyway, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening in this in this race involving Democratic candidate Abdul El-Sayed. So, we have yet another Democratic candidate who is to the left of the mainstream Democratic Party dealing with cynical, disgusting allegations in an effort to sink his campaign. There's really no other way to put it. And he's not only getting attacked by Republicans, also Democrats. It's really this bipartisan fight to sink his campaign. And I want to show you who I'm talking about. So Abdul El-Sayed, who you saw in the images beside me as I was sharing the story, drew some backlash recently, okay? And he drew backlash for doing what I think political leadership needs to do, and that's finding ways to work with like-minded folks on the other side of the political aisle to accomplish wins for the American people. And I'm not talking about the real bipartisanship we do see in Congress these days, which is, oh, we want to start another war? Great. We want to increase the budget for the Pentagon, which has failed every single audit? Great, we agree, let's do it. The kind of bipartisanship I'm talking about is the type of bipartisanship that seeks to solve the very real problems we do have in this country. So Abdul El-Sayed had apparently mentioned something on a podcast that drew the ire of some Democrats. So during an appearance on Politico's podcast, The Conversation with Dasha Burns, he was asked about the overlap between the populist right and left, particularly as it relates to former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and her appearing to shift her views quite a bit when it comes to things like Israel, corporate greed, and more. Take a look.
So I talked to former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene on this podcast in April, and it's kind of remarkable how similar some of your positions are. Like, she also has condemned AIPAC's influence in politics, called for no more US taxpayer dollars to Israel, said that the cost of health insurance needs to go down. Do you think you could build this new coalition with people like MTG?
Look, she said a lot of things I disagree with too. I'll just say this, that I wouldn't be surprised, right? When you ask me about why establishment elite Democrats are so worried about me, it's because there are a lot of people who listen to her who are going to vote for me in the general election. They're not afraid I'm going to lose. They're afraid I'm going to win. And at the end of the day, we get so polarized about D versus R, red versus blue, that we forget that when you talk about the things that people actually care about, you can win elections. You can do that in uncommon ways. But too often, the Democratic Party is more interested in continuing to take money from its corporate and special interest donors than it is in speaking conventional truth. It should be an obvious thing that everybody agrees with, that we should keep our money here. It should be an obvious thing that everybody agrees with, that people shouldn't go into medical debt in the richest, most powerful country in the world. The fact that MTG agrees with those points should not be all that uncommon, because they're just like obvious things to say. And the fact that neither party is willing to say that is a reflection of the amount of money both parties take from the corporations and the special interests who, in effect, buy them off to be able to say that. Look, when you have a public consensus that's here, right, everybody kind of agrees on one thing, and then a political consensus that's over here, the difference is usually somebody's money. When it comes to healthcare, the difference is pharma money and health insurance money and big hospital money. And when it comes to the question of foreign policy, the difference is usually AIPAC money. And if we got that money out, maybe our political consensus would match our public consensus.
Okay, so what he centered his argument on is that he doesn't think the corruption that is now baked into our political system has really boded well for the American people. And he's right about that. And to be fair to Marjorie Taylor Greene, even when I loathed her, and she was, in my opinion, pretty unhinged in her behavior, even then, she was not taking money from big donors. She was one of the top fundraisers in her party, but she was funded by small dollar donors who loved her because of her populist message. So while she certainly has shifted her views in some ways when it comes to things like Israel, for instance, the fact of the matter is, the foundation of what she, or how she presented herself and who she was and what she wanted to do, it's always kind of been there. And I do think she matured during her time in Congress. She came in acting like a lunatic, and I think she learned a lot and came out with policy views that I still disagree with vehemently. But I found the humanity in her because she showed her humanity. And I can work with people like that on specific issues, obviously, right? So I have no problem with what Abdul El-Sayed said in that video. However, it did lead to backlash from Israel's operatives, of course, like Eitan Fishberger, who says that Michigan's communist Senate candidate, Abdul El-Sayed, says that there are a lot of people like me, or a lot of people who listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene who are going to vote for me. I love it when they just say the PSYOP out loud. Or Eitan, it could be possible that, there is a consensus between the left and the right in terms of the voters, of course, that Israel is really a liability to the people of the United States. They're welfare queens that keep asking for more and more money, taking. And I would venture to say that both Democratic and Republican voters don't appreciate that. Anyway, then you have the Democrats, just Democratic establishment voters like Jose, who says, but Kamala Harris speaking with Liz Cheney was a problem. Yeah, Jose, it was a problem. It was a problem. It was. Liz Cheney might have a good argument in regard to her moral high ground when it comes to pushing back against Trump following January 6th. But that doesn't erase her lifetime of warmongering, of dragging our soldiers into endless Middle East wars. She is a despicable neocon scumbag. And what you are signaling to your voters when you prance around town with the likes of freaking Liz Cheney is you are signaling to them that in the middle of this genocide against Gaza, if you elect me, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going. So yeah, Jose, it was a problem. Okay. Also, there's this huge difference between pointing out that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Abdul El-Sayed's voters might have arrived at some of the same conclusions and, being endorsed by and campaigning with the daughter of the architect of the Iraq War. Nonetheless, many conservative Democrats heralded the Cheney endorsement. And it wasn't just Liz Cheney, it was also Dick Cheney. And when Dick Cheney endorsed Kamala Harris, she said that she was honored by it. That was a problem, Jose. It was a problem, okay? So let's go to this comment from Joe Biden, who said, what she did, this is about Liz Cheney, what she did took not only political courage, but physical courage. I don't care what Biden had to say. He's a total joke and a disgrace. Okay, so but Republicans and progressives aligning over the hatred of corruption and money in politics and needless wars, by the way, apparently a bridge too far for some in the Democratic establishment. So the Abdul El-Sayed and Haley Stevens race is very charged, incredibly charged. So the race has emerged as a bit of a proxy battle between the Democratic Party's, socialist wing or actual left wing and the establishment leadership. So you have Bernie Sanders, Ocasio-Cortez, and Elizabeth Warren backing Abdul El-Sayed. And then Stevens has secured the endorsements from retiring Senator Gary Peters from Michigan and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who of course is the Senate Minority Leader from New York. And it should be noted that Peters had originally pledged to be neutral. Gary Peters, he was like, I'm not going to endorse, I don't want to stay out of it. But once he realized that Abdul El-Sayed is doing pretty well, all of a sudden he changed his mind and decided to endorse Haley Stevens. Now, Stevens was endorsed by Democratic kingmaker Jim Clyburn, who has been behind such bangers as Kamala Harris 2024, Biden 2024, and Clinton 2016. But for Clyburn, the case of simply endorsing Haley Stevens, not enough for Clyburn. Like, he's got to stick a knife in Abdul El-Sayed. And how is he going to do that? Do you want to guess? Okay. So here's what he said about one of the rallies featuring El-Sayed. He said, I saw a picture that concerned me coming out of Michigan. I saw the rally. I didn't see a single person that looks like me. That tells me all I need to know. Are you calling the Muslim candidate in this race, who's up against a white woman who's heavily funded by AIPAC, racist? Is that what you're doing? So Ryan Grimm found out that one of the consultants for Haley Stevens was working for Palantir simultaneously. And after he called that out in an interview, Stevens's campaign let that consultant go. Is that the kind of rot that Jim Clyburn wants to endorse, and in fact is willing to smear a candidate as a racist in order to get his way? And are we really okay with people cynically using their identity to sink political campaigns? Are we? Because I'm not. There's been no indication that Abdul El-Sayed is racist. None, zero. But hey, if the race card can sink a left-wing candidate that we don't like, why not? And if that doesn't work, maybe we can use rape allegations. That hasn't happened yet. So it should be noted that Stevens is white and El-Sayed is not. It shouldn't even matter. I shouldn't even have to bring that up. But Jim Clyburn forced me to. So thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. AOC weighed in on the demographic breakdown of this whole situation. And I was bracing for impact because I was terrified of what she was going to say. She tends to fall in line with the culture war type stuff. But she said, I think what we're actually experiencing right now is a more nuanced conversation than to simply treat Black people and Black voters in this country as a monolith. That is a mistake that I think many people are making. Yes, AOC, yes, it is a mistake. Thank you. So conservative Dems have been quick to dismiss, all sorts of DSA candidates appealing to mostly white voters. But is that true? Journalist Michael Lang, who did a deep dive on Claire Valdez's victory in New York, actually found out that she won over every race and age demographic. This is not the electoral footprint of a gentrifier candidate squeaking past on margins from millennial and Gen Z white transplants. It is the signature of a multiracial, cross-generational coalition. I think Democrats, and this is important, guys, need to wise up to these cynical attacks that are being carried out by the very politicians who are funded by corporate interests and foreign lobbies. We can't be suckers, and you can't immediately believe every allegation that is used against a candidate that the establishment clearly doesn't like. Please be smarter than that. Anyway, we're not done with this topic because in the bonus episode for our members, I am going to talk about how Jasmine Crockett, a Democrat, is attempting to sabotage another Democrat's candidacy for a Senate seat in Texas. We'll be right back.